Today is very much about human sensing spaces, and so the idea was actually inspired by a conversation I had with Andrew Hudson-Smith. Andrew is Director and Deputy Chair of the Bartlett CASA. It's a Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis. We have Lewis Robbins, who is a strategist at Jack Morton Worldwide, and then we have Alistair. You can introduce yourself actually, can't you?
I think we're entering an interesting period where a lot of things that were not the domain of the creative industries and therefore not necessarily within the remit of agencies, whether that is different sort of technologies or interventions or understanding of human behaviour, are going to start to change the sorts of things we do. And the UK has a lead, arguably, in this sort of industry. And UCL is now the largest university in Europe, and therefore I feel like we sit in proximity to Soho amongst other places that are thought leaders in this, and we should be trying to figure out what the relationship between these sort of emerging technologies where we do have some expertise and how they might actually play out in the real world. So I will shut up because I don't actually know much about it, and I'll let these two.
As introduced, I run a academic research lab. We've been about for 20 years, 21 next year, begins to make me feel old. 24 postdocs, 3 professors, 6 lecturers, 2 master's courses, mainly on urban modelling, Internet of Things, data, computer science, social science. We've sort of smuggled in a university in a lab, so a mix of mathematicians, physicists, computer scientists, architects, planners, all in one lab. We're just beginning to join things up, and we're beginning to look at things that you can wire up now, and see if we can wire up ourselves, and see if we can share our heartbeats and share our brain waves, and understand how the places we build make us feel. So there's all these wearables. Now, this was the big thing last year, the Apple Watch and etc. They haven't quite taken off the way the hype said, but it's a growing trend. So the next 5-10 years, the wearables will grow. The Apple Watch, you know, it measures your heartbeat. Doesn't measure it all that well, but it does read it. And it measures it enough to begin to save lives. So there's a few people who have noticed that their Apple heartbeat is a bit low, and they've gone and had that checked out. They found out there actually is something wrong with their heart, and that's helped save their life. But we're more interested, from an academic lab point of view, in beginning to get data sets that we couldn't get before. So I'm aware I have a world-leading neuroscientists in the front row. My apologies for this off-the-shelf view of the neuroscience world. But you can get kit now that you can just put on your head, and you can get a raw feed from your brainwave. So from a social science point of view, we're very questionnaire-based. You know, we're census-based. We ask people what they feel like in places, and I don't think people tell the truth. From a questionnaire point of view, I think people lie. Whereas if you can get a raw feed from their brain, you can begin to actually get a proper sense of how people feel at that point. So we've been walking people around town who are partially sighted to see where the stress points of around town are, and then we're wiring up those points and re-walking them around town. As you walk around town, we're picking up where you are, and we're picking up these feeds from your brain. It's not the most nice hat to wear yet, but these things will, over the next 5 or 10 years, they will shrink down, and we walk around wearing headphones now. You know, maybe 5 or 10 years, we'll be walking around with a portable brainwave headset on, and it allows us to go from these peaks onto sort of mapping the bits of the brain that light up. You can begin to see which bits of town we like and where the stress points are. So I work just in the red bit. This is north-south Tottenham Court Road. You walk south, there's lots of roadworks. But if you walk east, this is Charlotte Street. Ooh, the brain calms down. Coffee, lunch, this is nice, have a beer. And if you walk along the shops, there's Oxford Street here, you can begin to see what shops light up the brain. So we're interested in therefore understanding what we mean by the sense of place. We can understand the shift from Soho to Covent Garden. That feeling is there, and we can map it now. Interesting from a supermarket point of view, if you can walk people around the shops, see which bits of the shops light up their brain. So we're moving into the emotional world. And I was sent to something called a research sandpit about 2 years ago. That's where you're sent to a manor house for a week, which sounds fantastic. But there's 30 people there you don't know. And from an academic point of view, that's like hell on earth. And you've got to form teams and you've got to pitch for grants. There's about 5 million up for grabs. Half of you will get cash, half of you will go home with no cash. There's taxis at the end of the week. You're just told yes or no, and you go home. And they tell you throughout the week that your work is rubbish and you need to rethink things. So we pitched the theme of the film Blade Runner, which is the Voight Kampf machine, where they sit, the end scene of the Blade Runner, where they sit the android down, there's a machine that looks into the eye, and it tells whether the android's human or not. I shan't ruin the film. But we blatantly pitched the film, basically. But we won. They very kindly gave us cash to try and communicate empathy via the network. So empathy is the thing that we find it hard to communicate. You know, we can communicate via Facebook or apps, but the empathetic feeling in our souls is the hard bit to get across. And we've done various things. I'm going to talk to you around a few of them. So someone from the local church popped into my room. I'm not a massively religious person myself, but she popped into my room and said, "Oh, just got this grant. Can we use your church?" So I'm interested in these candles you can buy. You know, you can buy them in craft fairs. They just light and you can leave them on and the house won't burn down. But you can hack them to Wi-Fi. And I'm interested that you go into churches and you pray, you light a candle, but the prayer stays in your head because there's nowhere to put it down. What if you can light a candle remotely, maybe via the network, maybe give the church a bit of cash via PayPal at the same time, and your prayer appears in the church and the candle lights. So you can pray into the church from home, but you're communicating things. So you're sharing your prayer, that intimate moment that you don't normally share. So we wired a church up. We put candles in the church. For those of you from the 1970s, which is very few, we put 4 candles in the church. It's lost, but and there's a prayer system where you type your prayers. These candles light, but then we linked this very urban Hackney church with a church in Hawkshead up in the lakes, and your prayers in Hackney are beamed onto the wall of Hawkshead, and it's a very rural, very conservative church, and vice versa. So the prayers from Hawkshead are beamed into the Hackney church. And it's been quite interesting because people's emotions are just sort of being let out, but the emotions are going into the network, and we have like an RSS feed. So we can pick up people's prayers. And I have a prayer window, which is just an iPad, in the corner of my room. And it's actually been interestingly quite difficult to have there because people pray for terrible things that have happened in their life. You know, their mum's got cancer or they've lost a child. And you're sitting looking at this iPad in the corner of the room thinking, I've got a window into people's emotions here. And I'm not sure that I should have. But that is the point of the grant, to sort of open up these conversation points, these links. You can link the headset system to lights too. So I'm interested from a meeting point of view. You know, you set meetings. I've just had a meeting from 8:30 till 5 with a European group, which is far too long. And if they could only just read my mood. So we've linked the headset to the lighting. And what if I could just sit in the meetings with a little light And if I'm just a bit annoyed, it'll just go red. That says, you know, I'm out. You've lost me, drifted off. So we're sort of playing about with lighting around the lab, which is empathetic based. So you can sense how I feel, which is where the ribbon sort of comes from. The breast cancer ribbon, you know, the AIDS ribbon. We wear ribbons to say we understand, we support, we empathise. But that's all it does. So we've networked the ribbon next to try and change it where the ribbon only goes off, little lights in it, if you've gone through the same thing. So the next 2 slides are the only pictures I could find because I didn't quite have time to get the proper photographs. But we've wired up, it's basically a TV remote control unit, which is always firing off. But when you walk past someone, it makes their lights flash and your lights flash at the same time because they're always looking for that TV remote control on-off. So it just says, you know, whether it's breast cancer or AIDS, I know what you've been through. It's that little nod without saying words. We want to sort of wire these up, put them into UCL hospital, perhaps sell them for £5 each, try and sort of change how the ribbon works, but trying to say things without words, which is where the hat sort of comes in now. So we're beginning to sort of move this into wearables and hats, and with age your eyesight gets worse and worse. And to begin to play about with wearing your heart not on your sleeve but on your head. So if you put that on, and it takes a couple of minutes just to sort of calm itself down. And it may or may not flash. I've no idea. Hopefully there's a little flash now and then. My heart is beating. So just sort of begin to think, you know, I can share my heartbeat just by wearing a hat on my head. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's useful from a dating point of view. I'm not quite sure. So the Internet of Me is the next big thing. You know, this is what's joining everything up. This is next sensing spaces. Insights into the urban health, your mental health too, because we begin to share stuff, and people in spaces and the things we leave behind, without sounding like the Wombles from the 1970s again. And the empathy, and it's the fact that we're digitally tracking everything, and more of our social life, our physical life, and our mental health life now. And that's where I end, just a brief view of human sensing spaces.
Obviously, a lot of cities are becoming a lot smarter now.
Yes.
And so, where London plays on the kind of global map, or if we're taking learnings from other cities, so
yep.
How are we kind of doing?
I think London claims that it's first, but that's because that's what London would do. It's a very competitive world now. Cities want to claim that they're the first. The world's happiest city is the current big claim to have. I'd argue that nowhere's smart yet, to be honest. It's a term that we all use. We use it to win research grants, but nowhere is smart yet. But we're only 5-10 years off. The smart home will come in, and it'll be beyond the smart fridge. And we are increasingly sensing the places that we live, as well as the sense of places where we work. So 5 or 10 years.
So what shifts need to take place in order for us to kind of become not just a home to be smart, but our environments around us, the public spaces?
I think it's a sense of trust. Augmented reality glasses are coming. Google Glass was there. The technology worked, but they canned it for privacy issues. You could take a photograph with the blink of your eye. Privacy was all over the place. Daily Mail was up in arms. But Google Glass 2 is coming out soon. And it's the privacy. We thought people would become up in arms when we realised people increasingly being tracked and tagged. But it turns out there was a bit of a shrug, and we understand that when we do our shopping online, you know, everything we do online is now being tracked. And as long as we get points or percentage off cups of coffee or something, I think we're happy to be tracked in public spaces more and more. Every time you go in a shopping centre, your location is tracked. No one tells you that, but you're tracked. And from a social science point of view, it's fantastic because we understand how places work.
So Lewis, I guess after kind of hearing about the work that Andrew's been involved in, from a brand perspective, what have you seen that kind of links into this, sort of that you can start to see, again, we're moving into this world where it's all kind of being connected a lot more, and how brands are kind of capitalising on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think something that's really interesting and exciting for me to see in some of the work that you put up is when you're kind of looking at maps of cities and spaces and being able to detect what is it about an environment that can cause people to feel something emotionally, or what is it about an environment that can kind of attract a person's attention. And that for me is interesting because I think we've always really struggled to make those forces of emotion and attention kind of tangible. You know, we're quite good at looking at measurement and results, but how people got there, or what they felt, or what they looked at, has always been a bit more mysterious. So I think the implications of that are really interesting. Trying to hook it into some examples of brands and what they've done. British Airways did something recently. They called it the happiness blanket, which is the most nauseating name. But basically the idea of it was that it was an experiment. Like 7 people got on a flight, a transatlantic flight, and they were fitted up with these sort of sort of like these headsets that could basically monitor the electrical activity, similar to, I think, the kit that you had sorted up. Yeah. And then that data was transmitted wirelessly to these fibre optic blankets. And these blankets would glow red if that person was anxious or strongly experiencing emotion. And if they were calmer, then those blankets would kind of glow blue. And so I think that's really interesting because it kind of shifts the emphasis, or it shifts the way that brands kind of interact with people. So instead of someone putting their hand up and saying, you know, I'm uncomfortable, I would like some water, or, you know, something's wrong, it means that brands can be more proactive and kind of anticipate, you know, when it is that people, you know, might need something. So again, it's that empathy thing, you know, it's a visual shortcut, if you like, that enables brands to empathize with people. And I think the other particular benefit of that one experience is that it also enables them to track, you know, people's responses to food. There was a noticeable uplift in mood when the food was introduced into a fight. You know, they could track people's emotional responses to different forms of entertainment. They could see that when people drifted into a deep sleep, you know, they kind of became much calmer. And I think that was also all augmented by certain stuff within the cabin as well. So BA use different kinds of light to help people, to help their kind of circadian rhythm. So if it's getting towards, you know, nighttime, they'll use like a red wavelength light of quite a low intensity, and that's like an evening light basically. That means that your body starts producing or stops producing melatonin. So you're kind of more geared to sleep. So that in that one particular example, it's about that shift from reacting to anticipating, to having a much clearer idea of you know, these individual touch points and how people interact with them. And that's also augmented by, you know, environmental cues that help kind of sort of regulate and monitor mood as well.
Both in my work and in research I've done, I looked into using brainwaves to understand all sorts of things about people. And from my understanding of the research, it's very difficult to get any insights about mood or emotions. I'm curious to see what the BA example, how they made it work and how you guys make it work. Because while you can capture things like arousal from skin galvanic responses to heartbeat or even brainwaves, to understand anything about the pleasure measure is still not quite there for us. Yeah. Every brand would love to have it, but it's not there. So I'd be curious to know how you've done it in your research, and also, even if it's there, it reduces moods and emotions to 2 states, positive and negative. And that's a little bit problematic in itself as well, because there is a lot more involved in being a human being than just positive and negative. How do you deal with that?
It's basically not there yet, but we're moving it into architecture-based research where it's never been there. So it's early work, and you combine it with every other data set that you have, but we're aware if you're walking people around streets, you need to know about the noise levels, you need to know where the eyes are looking at that point. The GPS resolution is also not quite there. So it's basically perfect PhD work, which is where it's come out of. You're looking at the technology. The technology's off-the-shelf technology has moved on. The software is moving on quite rapidly.
But not necessarily
But
into the emotional state.
Which is, I guess, where the realm of art comes in then. So the blanket stuff was fantastic. The press was good for them, but it was viewed as art, I think. And I think this is where the crossover, the PhD on this is a proper PhD. But when we do, linking it to the lighting, we're crossing the realms of art a bit. And that's not washing our hands, that therefore we don't have to justify that it doesn't quite work yet. We obviously write up that it doesn't quite work yet. But it's also looking towards things are moving so rapidly. 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we could never get hold of this stuff. And now the fact that it's coming into urban labs or British Airways, we're almost there. But I would fully admit, and I'm sure the neuroscientists in the front row would fully admit, that it's you have to take them apart and you have to hack them a bit and you have to put a proper cap on too. And even then, they're not what they should be.
We're a long, long way from having a machine as good at detecting.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
we're a long way from the machine doing all of the work, but this
Yeah.
kind of like hybrid machine-human system where the human's not trying to, play the role of deceiving the technology. How close do you think we are from that sort of interaction where there's enough trust? You go back to your original point about the trust mechanism being key to adoption,
Yeah.
if nothing else, right?
Yeah.
Going back to Hannah's point, how far do you think you are, regardless of how well the technology can intervene in eliciting an accurate response? How far do you think we are from just volunteering that sort of data, right?
I don't think we're far off. There's various papers that we've written on this, but we're incredibly willing just to be tracked and tagged. And if someone will offer us a free cup of coffee to tell you how they feel, their emotional state, and to train a camera or something, or take a picture of how they feel and say, oh God, I'm having a bad day, free cup of coffee. We're not far off. I thought people would be a lot more upset about being tracked and tagged, but either that or people just don't realise it.
But it's also true that emotion is very social. Why does canned laughter work? Right?
Yeah.
People don't mind having their emotions suggested by the environment.
Yeah.
It's actually they're maybe more relaxed about emotion leaking out than other ideas. Also because they're relatively non-specific. And so they're not so worried that they're losing control of information.
Yeah.
It's not like you can encode your bank account in a smile.
This is not a smart plan, this is the smart surveillance state that we have the technology to put in place. And that's where the ethics begins to kick in, because I stopped then. This is not what I want to do, it's not what I'm here for. But it's interesting how you view it from a cultural shift. So I think we're fine with being tracked and tagged, because we trust the state. And I may be naive on that point. But if you go to yeah. But if you go to a different culture, increasingly you can monitor people through this technology.
Given that your first challenge was about trust, then where do you think the brands sit at the moment in terms of trust? Obviously, maybe not relying at this point in time on the technology itself.
Yeah.
But in terms of user or consumer or whatever you want to call it, buy-in for.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think, like, broadly speaking, people don't really trust brands. I think people would probably put more faith in governments and state organisations than brands who are kind of sort of assumed to have an ulterior motive, to sell stuff, which is their motive. I think the thing with brands and the thing with introducing new forms of measurement is, as Andrew was saying, if people can see what they're getting out of it, then they're more willing to kind of commit and to kind of give their data. So I think people need to be aware of what the exchange is. It's not enough for you to just give stuff, because why would you do that? What's in it for you? I think it's for the people designing, organising those experiences, organising these interactions. Then they need to make it clear through the design of the experience that if you are offering any form of data or whatever, there's a very kind of tangible return. And I think that's how brands, should work, and I think that's how successful brands are working. It's less about kind of projecting a message onto people and trying to manipulate them into buying something, and more about, okay, what new kinds of value that we can create that actually help people in some way. I think that's what's driving a lot of innovation in brand experiences.
We're talking quite a lot about data and this data we're generating in cities, but I guess the central question is who's going to end up owning the data? Is it going to be the city itself? Is it going to be the companies? Is it going to be us? And I wonder if you'd had any thoughts and reflections on that, and where the kind of greatest benefit is, so to speak.
It's interesting that Smart London Plan has put the smart citizen first, but they've put them first because that's free to do. So we're giving away all the information in the first place. So why on earth would we make our own app? We just collect all of the data from everyone else's app. So the data is owned by us ultimately, but it's mined and harvested by anyone because you've clicked yes to those terms. And I think where people's shift may come is that they will realise that their data that they're sharing is worth something. So maybe the brands will start to pay you to run around this park or to use their fitness app or their health app, because they're nowhere without us and they need us to share those feeds. So at the moment, they're not in court, but there's a lot of big companies who sit on an awful lot of data who haven't done anything with it yet because they know there's ethics behind it. I don't know, a large unnamed search engine company. Your phone pings them every 2 minutes, and every phone in the world pings them, every Android phone in the world pings them every 2 minutes. So they have dwell time for almost everyone in the world. And that is incredibly powerful. From advertising, they've set up their own city lab because they know there's something in it. Apple does the same thing. Your Apple phone pings Apple every 2 minutes.
So we covered, 80% of the handsets, right?
Yeah, yeah. And yet no one seems to realise that. But if you log in, you can go to your personal dashboard view and it shows you where you've been for the last 5 years on a map.
And outside of those brands that may or may not have an operating system or a handset, right?
Yeah.
The network provider has that data.
Yes.
And even arguably some of the payment providers, like Micros, etc., have some of that data.
They have it too, yeah.
And just can't use it
because
they don't necessarily own it or not.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of huge spectrum of people that do have that data.
Yeah.
We'll go back to TfL.
Yeah.
You've logged people through the system, right?
Yes.
Even if
Yeah.
they're not using shortest path. Right?
Yeah.
We haven't told them.
Yeah.
You see a change where there's just a sort of public shift in what are perceived to be allowable uses of it?
Yeah. I think we'll just eventually just shrug and just realise that that's just part of life now. Part of life of owning the phone is clicking yes to those terms. And it won't be a phone or whatever comes next, because the phone's daft. You take it in your pocket and look down at it. It's nuts while walking on the road. So the augmented reality version of the world will just track you. It will be linked to your brainwave headset, and you will just click to yes to those terms, and therefore you will get fed stuff that you like, which is probably quite a useful thing, isn't it? I will get things that I like because it knows where I am, it knows what I like, it knows I like a flat white. It'll offer me one free now and again. Oh, hey.
Wouldn't it at some point stupefy us completely, and we wouldn't be able to tell? I mean, already now I don't bother to remember routes most of the time. I just Google them every time, and then we will become unable to recognize human emotions.
Yeah, I defer to my colleague at the front on that one, but I don't think we'll ever lose that. But I type everything. My handwriting skills to write upper and lower case are like a child's now. I write everything up in uppercase. I would fail my coursework age 5 with my handwriting. So I've lost that skill. I can't read maps because I just wait to be told left or right. So I don't have to think. So as soon as it is in front of your eye, then yeah, you don't have to think as much. So that use of your brain may get less enhanced.
Go back to your original point, which is probably that the value will reduce to the point where possibly reduce to the point where it's being given away. Having lived through a generation of newspapers that were once expensive and they're now handed away free. With the commoditisation of the technology, you sort of getting to the point where you get handed it free. Like,
Yeah.
Do you think the paid-for content model is strong enough to?
Things have rapidly come down in price. From an iPad, the iPad was 400 quid when it launched. It's still 400 quid. But if you go for a commercialised Amazon pad, they're £79 now because they're linked into that whole ecosystem. They want you to have it for £79, so they're making a loss because you will buy stuff and they make that cash back. So yeah, they just want us to buy and consume and track us. It's a bit bleak, no?
Could I just pick up on the point about advertising, personalisation of advertising? Because it seems like certainly over the last 4 or 5 years there's been a disintermediation of decision making by technology, whether it's picking the route that you're going to take, so it's the example that you gave, all the way through to where you put your money, what you invest in for your pension with nothing, for example. So I suppose the discussion I'd really like to hear is whether you actually think advertising will be pitched at the individual or whether it will be picked at machines that know the individual, and whether we will still make decisions to buy stuff.
That's a good question. There's the link with the machine world. I mean, robots have not been mentioned, but you know that is arguably the next big thing, and we're not there yet, but it's the next thing. And that human emotion with the robot, perhaps there's more trust with the machine than the person. So you go to a till, most of them are self-service tills now, but I can pay with my watch or my tap to pay card, and that emotionally feels like I'm not paying. It feels like I don't pay for the tube. I just tap. I go, no, I did. I think it's £2.50. I literally don't know how much things cost now, and that machine to human takes away the feeling of, my God, I don't know how much it costs to get a bus, let alone a pint of milk. And we are moving towards that machine-human world, but in a very simple way. They're literally just grabbing us for cash as we just tap past. I literally tap my phone and my Visa card comes up and I pay. And that's a level of trust that I never thought I would have. But it's so much easier than getting my card out of my pocket. I've saved 5 seconds of my life.
I think there's, sort of an issue around that is kind of I think with evolutions in technology, there comes with that the question, where do we want to spend our attention and our time and our energy? Do we think that it's valuable and worthwhile to continue to sort of micromanage certain elements of our life, to look at a map, to figure out where you're going, to remember phone numbers and dates and names and so on? Or actually, are we kind of relieved that technology can take that burden for us? I use Evernote a lot and it's fantastic. I've been using it for several years and now I have this kind of cloud-based encyclopedia of all the interesting stuff that I've seen. And the effect that has is it's much easier to draw different associations between different kinds of information and so on and so forth. So I think that's a question, because our attention's, it's a resource. We spend it. We only have so much of it. And it's very valuable. So I think maybe like a middle ground, if you like, of technology that can kind of help facilitate or introduce us to new kind of targeted experience through advertising might not be that bad. If also the alternative might be kind of trawling time out for ages and trying to find something that you think's good.
I think there's a lot to do with that with transparency as well. Like, there's kind of one of this thinking of what we discussed earlier, this binary kind of yes or no to accepting terms and conditions. Why yes or no? Why are there not levels? I'm perfectly okay sharing some information, but I don't particularly want you to have everything, and you're kind of brought up with this kind of choice. If you want to use this amazing app that we've really sold to you that is fabulous, you have to give us your soul versus you get nothing. And it's kind of that level of kind of, life is not like that. It's not all or nothing. You have variations, you have grey zones. So is there not an opportunity for this whole concept of the terms and conditions that no one reads whatsoever?
No.
To actually have that level of choice and transparency. Actually, do you know what? I've got no problem you collecting this information because I want that free coffee, for instance, and I've balanced the kind of communication of give and take. Whereas I don't think it's enough value for me to give you all my information just for that little free coffee because I know if X, Y, and Z that can happen. So there's a lot of movement. I mean, with the transparency of one of the main things to trust is that I have no idea what is being done with my information.
No.
If I start to have a little bit more of idea, I make that choice, and therefore then I've engaged in this contract with you with open eyes, knowing what it is that I'm going to be getting for my money, data, whatever. And that's a big element that needs to come into play.
Yeah. You can now get marketing devices which are owned by the big firms, which you can get to play music, or you can get it to order stuff. And it's listening for the term Amazon, I've run out of washing powder, it automatically orders it. So people are putting microphones in their home that are just on the whole time. So the level of trust and what you buy into has gone up so high now.
There seems to be more opportunity for brands to be mistrusted more than ever as all this stuff's going to start coming in, I think, especially in a society like ours where they're already not trusted. So I think that a sense of purpose for brands is going to be more important than ever. But again, I don't think there's many people doing that very well. I think it can, sometimes when people talk about a purpose for a brand, they come up with something that's not really related to the brand role, and it ends up just being a bit of a kind of cheesy piece of CSR. But I think that purpose-driven marketing is going to be more important than ever in the next 10 years. Obviously, you have things like a Girl, which really worked, and it worked against a real problem in society where kind of femininity was seen as a negative, and they turned it into a positive. I think brands are going to have to start thinking about things like that more, but they're going to have to do it in a very authentic way, because ultimately, as a brand planner, I think that those fundamentals have to be completely sorted and nailed. I know that brand planning is not so here's a model over here and we've got consumers over here anymore. Everything has to be a bit more fluid, but still, to get those fundamentals right, brands have to do that in order to be trusted, because there is more opportunity than ever for them not to be trusted as people start saying, hold on, these guys are tracking me, these guys are after my data, what are they wanting from me? And if they can get to a position of trust and have real transparency, then I think they can do that.
What is the kind of tip that you'd give people in an agency or brands to try to be a little bit more purposeful in what they do?
My advice would be not to click yes to those terms and don't buy things, which is exactly opposite from what brands want. It is the element of trust, but there's core brands that we do trust, but they need to be very careful, I think, nowadays, if they just release an app where your bank account data goes. But even then, we see brands where they've really mucked up. And people are upset for a few weeks, but then they go back. So I think people's attention span is short. Brands can almost do whatever they want nowadays.
Yeah, so I think that, I guess if you were networking after this event, and sort of talking and kind of standing in a bar, and someone came up to you and said, "Hi, my name's Clive, and my 3 personality pillars are honesty, integrity, and respect," you probably think that person was a lunatic. So I think if brands want to be trusted, then a lot of it is to do with just stop saying what you're about and actually start behaving in a way that doesn't paint you as being a hypocrite. To the point that you were making earlier, if brands are all about, if brands want your trust, then they have to show that, well, actually it's a reciprocal two-way relationship. And I think, yeah, that'd be it really. People to people. Ooh. Yeah.
Thank you.